Hello my friends, welcome back to another video series on some of the most common chess openings that you'll encounter. In this video we want to take a look at common queen's pawn openings to add to our opening repertoire. So let's dive right into it. We have white will bring their pawn to d4, bring their queen's pawn up. I recommend that you bring your own queen pawn up to d5 to stop your opponent from gaining a supercenter, that is getting two pawns on the e4 and d4 squares, and this will limit your opponent's options as much as possible so that you don't have to learn hundreds and hundreds of different lines here. Okay, so one of the most common and oldest chess openings would be the Queen's Gambit. So anytime we have a gambit, that means we're risking giving up material, but this is a bit of a misnomer, meaning it's not quite true. So the Queen's Gambit is not a true gambit because this pawn is actually not that safe to take, and we'll look at why this is the case. So if black decides to go ahead and chop on c4, then white can play the safe move, pawn up to e3, and this is a bit of a discovery. Did you notice that this bishop is now attacking this pawn? So when we move one piece, then it exposes the attack of this bishop, and black, if they want to hold on to this pawn, they're going to need to guard it. So that's why black will bring their pawn up to b5. And if you're white, if I let you pause the video, what would you do to try to undermine this guard? So we want to try to overwork this b5 pawn. That's right. You would play your pawn up to a4 and challenge this pawn chain right here. Okay, if black decides to capture on a4, then they'll be ahead two pawns, but they won't be able to hold on to it for very long at all, because if you'll notice, black has doubled pawns on the c file, doubled pawns on the a file, and they're also isolated because there's no black pawn on the d file and no black pawn on the b file. So these pawns are on their own, and likewise on the a file, these pawns on a7 and a4 have no buddy on the b file to sort of glue their pawns together. So they're very easy to pick apart here. After black plays this move, white could perhaps continue bishop captures on c4, and you can see this pawn is already attacked two times and not defended at all. It's actually very easy to attack it even more, so white doesn't even need to rush to recapture this. Say for example bishop d7, really trying to hold on to these pawns. White could just go knight c3 here. It's attacked three times, and they could even attack it more times if they wanted to, perhaps bishop b5, but probably not necessary. They're just going to win it back, and white will have an advantage. So rewinding here, when we play our pawn up to e3 and then we go b5 here, white can still try this a4 move, and then if black wisens up and tries to have a different response here, let's say for example pawn up to a6, if I give you a moment to pause the video, what would you do here with white pieces? Okay, if you said just go ahead and capture here, you'd be right, because we're creating a pin. So this was a bit of a discovery and a pin. When we move one piece and it exposes the attack of another, then that would be a discovery. And in this case, this pawn on a6, he's pinned, he can't capture. If he does, then our rook will come all the way down the board and capture on a8, and that would of course be terrible for black. So we're going to rewind a little bit. We'll see what happens if black tries to do something else. Let's see if they push their pawn up to c6. Then it seems like it solves this problem. If white will capture on b5 and then c captures on b5, then they still have defense over this pawn and their rook isn't hanging, or so they think. If I give you a second to pause the video, what would you play with white? This will win a piece at least. Okay, if you found this move, queen to f3, then give yourself a pat on the back, because this is looking right down this long diagonal and attacking this rook, and turns out there's no way that black can guard this. They're going to need to give up at least a full piece here, whether that be knight to c6 or bishop to b7. No matter what it will be, white will just go ahead and capture, and black can block here, But then after queen a6, white is just a piece up. So that would clearly be bad for black. Alright, but let's see if our opponent gets wiser and they don't want to capture on c4. So if we're playing with black, then we need to figure out some better way to defend here. So what I'd recommend is not capture this pawn, not accept the queen's gambit, and instead play a Slav defense with pawn to c6. So if our opponent captures here, then we don't have to bring our queen out early and don't have to have our queen get pinballed and hit around by our opponent's pieces. We'll just capture with our c-pawn and everything will be okay. Okay, but going further into this variation, let's play out some more moves and see what will happen for black. So white could play some more moves in this, and you'll note that white isn't blocking their c-pawn. One thing that is important to touch on here is that if white plays knight to c3 here, almost like it were king's pawn opening, then they're blocking their c-pawn, and this will be awkward because usually in queen's pawn openings, we want to have our c-pawn attack our opponent's d-pawn or support our own d-pawn. So that's just one small detail, but it's worth mentioning. Alright, so back to our Slav defense. Pawn up to c6 here, then normal move would be knight c3 to add more pressure to d5. If you're black, we just maintain the stronghold with knight to f6, and then knight to f3, more development, always good. More development from black. White goes bishop to g5, and pawn e6. Then black, you can see, has this very strong center with d5, and this whole position is based around this. So that's why I recommend this position, because it's very solid, very easy to learn, and it can transpose from many different openings. So play could continue pawn up to e3, then black is just continuing their development and preparing to castle. Then white could continue developing their pieces. These are all fairly good moves for both sides, but one item that we want to learn if we're playing with black in the Slav defense, as soon as our opponent moves their light square bishop, then we want to go ahead and capture on c4. The reason for this is we want to have our opponent waste time first before we go ahead and capture on c4. For example, if you see the difference, if instead of bishop to e7 here, if we immediately capture on c4, then white can spend one move recapturing. So it's a subtle point, but it is still important that we want to make our opponent waste as much time as possible. Okay, so that's why bishop to e7, bishop to d3, and now and only now do we capture on c4. White will need to capture back, of course, because they don't want to lose their bishop and don't want to be behind in material. Then, if I let you pause the video, what would you play as black to go ahead and attack this bishop and gain some more space? Okay, so if you said b5, give yourself a pat on the back. White will then need to run away, so lose a little bit more time. Bishop back to b3 or d3, doesn't really matter. Then what we want to do as black, one of our plans, is to take control of the center and fight back here. So we want to play the move pawn up to c5, but right now it's not possible. What's going to happen if we move our pawn up to c5? Pause the video and find the answer. Okay, so if we move our pawn up to c5 immediately, then we're going to be dropping our pawn on b5. So this is a very common mistake that we have a video about. Anytime we make a move, we gain some squares, but we give up others. So go back and check my other video for this extremely common type of mistake. Okay, so how would you guard b5? Pause the video, find the right answer. Okay, so I would recommend guarding by playing pawn up to a6. We don't want to play, for example, bishop up to a6 because this is going to be awkward and this pawn can no longer guard this pawn. We like, as a general rule, to have our pawns be guarding other pawns. So that's why pawn up to a6 is necessary. Then say for example white will castle. Then black will go ahead and immediately challenge white's center with c5. That's our plan here in the Slav defense. So if white plays what looks to be a reasonable move here, d captures c5, it turns out black is having a very easy game here. Sometimes many chess players would say to take is a mistake, and here that would not be an exception to the rule. So black could go ahead and play knight captures on c5, and this is attacking the bishop and allowing a trade of queens here. If white goes ahead and captures, then take is another mistake here. It's just allowing black to have an easier game. So black can just recapture with their bishop, and after bishop to c2, trying to make sure the knight can't capture, then what would you play as black to just improve your position overall? Okay, there could be more than one move you could argue for. I would say just bishop to b7 seems like the simplest way to improve our position here, putting our bishop on an active diagonal and making sure we get our pieces developed to safe locations. And the game could continue for a few more moves, for example rook to d1, h6, just gain a bit more space. After bishop to h4, then black could just castle here and they'll be okay. And white will not really have any sort of opening advantage to show for having played first. So there you have it. This has been our queen's pawn opening that you want to add to your opening repertoires. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye now.